Should you be doing more fundamental studies or finished illustrations? The answer lies in where you are in your artistic progress, because the ratio will flip-flop depending on where you are. My name is Clint, I'm an illustrator and art educator, and we're going to break it down in this episode that's sponsored by Skillshare. But more about them and the class I have on their platform at the end of the episode. But for now, what we want to do is focus on understanding that both of these, both the studies and the illustrations, have very different ways of working to improve your skills. On the studies side, which you see examples of them here, these could include things like foreshortening and perspective, basic anatomy, shapes for rendering characters, shading. I have a playlist here on the channel. You can check out Art Fundamentals playlist, and I'll outline those and give you ideas about kind of what those are. The big thing about them is that they are about isolating. It's really simplifying a subject so that you can get good at one particular thing. When you get rid of all the other stuff, like no backgrounds, maybe no color, no shading, you just want to learn, how do I draw that nose better? What are the forms in that nose? When you isolate down, you can make a lot of progress very quickly. And that's what you can't really do with finished illustrations, because you've got to be doing a lot of things at the same time. You also tend to do things once or very few times. Whereas with the isolating studies, you could go draw a cube 50 times in different rotations with different shadings. You're doing things over and over and over to get better at them. This is the exact same thing that athletes do when they're running drills for, professional sports. They don't just play the entire game to get better. What they do is they work on very specific skills. But then what? Then they have to do some sort of scrimmage. Why? Because it then incorporates that skill into their entire skill set. And that is the key word here with finished illustrations, is that they are about incorporating your skills together into a unit. Becomes part of your actual workflow. And all the little bits of information are kind of like little islands. They're not really connected to each other. It's how to shade a sphere, how to use three-point perspective. It's learning how to do, a basic skeleton, that sort of thing. But then when you do a finished illustration, what you're having to do is start tying all of those bits of information together. You're running from your three-point perspective, and then you're having to do your skeleton, and then you're building, the cranium on top of that, and you have to draw, from your knowledge of the skull, and then how do you, shade a sphere, and then how do you subdivide that into hair, and then eventually you reach your finished illustration. But you see what I mean here? When you do a finished illustration, it requires you to get all of those bits of information that you've been learning and put them into one big skill set. So we have a progress bar here. You start there on the left side. This is you, your little meeple. That's you. And then you're going this way. And you're going to start down there at the studies side, where you're going to be spending most of your time doing studies. You're going to be spending like 90% of your time doing studies. Whereas once you've learned the fundamentals and say that you've kind of passed that halfway point, now at this point, you're going to be doing about 50-50. It's going to be a mix of finished images, and it's going to be a mix of studies. And then down here, it's going to get more like, I'm going to say 90, maybe it's not quite that high. I'm somewhere around there as a professional, though. And then you're only doing like 10% studies, right? And that makes sense, right? There is a limit to what we will call fundamental studies. There will always be more things to study. But the important thing here is that there are things that you learn on this side with finished illustrations that you can't learn from the fundamental studies. And some of those could be workflow. That's a big one. It is literally, how do I go through the entire illustration process? How do I go from start to finish? Because that is a big hurdle for a lot of intermediate artists, a lot of junior artists have a real difficulty in actually finishing images. It's getting over that kind of middle hurdle of the image to wrap it all up. Other things that you have to deal with is, say, pacing. It's learning how do you estimate how much time an image is going to take. Because if you're going to eventually start working as a professional, then you need to be able to guesstimate how much time a commission is going to take. Other things could be stuff such as just patience, right? There are a bunch of things that you only learn by doing a finished illustration. I'll add one more here, and I'll call that multi. It is just having to do a multitude of different things in the same image. Over here, it is more about rendering a single image single subject really well. But then when you're doing a finished illustration, it's not just how do I render a good nose or a good ear. How do I render that person's face and their body and the horse they're on and the armor they're wearing and the castle in the background? And I've got to put it all together and make it look good as a unit. That is a lot more difficult, and that is an entirely different skill. So somewhere around here at the halfway point, how do you know when you're crossing that? Well, that really goes from when you're going from general to exception. Getting a little delay there from the recording software. Hopefully it's not too bad in the recording. Okay. What I mean here is you have a lot of your general subjects and the general issues that you're going to face. These are things that are going to be like really common. 80% of the time you're going to be doing people, same sort of normal lighting, same sort of normal materials, that sort of stuff. When you start wondering about should I be working on exceptions, he's like, oh, should I keep doing studies because I haven't studied the anatomy of blowfish yet? Well, unless you're, in a direction where you really need to know that, no, you just need to go ahead and start working on how to do a finished image. Otherwise, you want to just stick with the fundamentals until you learn those, and then you start moving into your finished illustrations. Well, I hope you have found this helpful, and something else you might find helpful is the class that I do have out on Skillshare. It is Illustrating Commissions, the Professional's Process, where I show you my process and how I approach doing commissions for clients, stepping from how to read the brief to doing all the sketches and the studies that will lead you to the final image. The first 1,000 people to follow the link below in the description can get a free premium trial membership from Skillshare, which you can use to watch the entire class. It's about 3.5 hours long, and you have access to all of the other learning content out there on Skillshare. They've got great things on how to learn music and the keyboard and how to cook and how to program Java. Whatever you're interested in, there is probably a really good teacher out there with a class on how to do that. And I'm very happy to have them as a sponsor. Please check it out if you want to learn more about the illustration process. And if you want to see more free videos here on the channel, I've got loads of them, so feel free to check those out. And until I see you next time, keep drawing.